Have you ever tried to make a game? I have, many times. It always takes far longer than you had planned for. Every small mechanic you think could be quick to add takes weeks of time. After spending years working on many different games, I've ended up with loads of different unfinished products, and honestly, none of them are remotely complete, let alone publishable. So I've given myself a new challenge, to finish and publish a game every month, and I'm expecting to fail. I'm expecting to release games that aren't finished, but aren't polished, and games that I'm not proud of. And that's the point. Being able to fail is what makes us who we are, so that's what I'm going to do. Fail. Over and over, until maybe, if I'm lucky, one day I might succeed. To hold myself accountable, I'm going to record this journey, forcing myself to release a video going through the progress I have made each week. And if you are interested in joining me on that journey, then I invite you to subscribe and comment on every mistake you see in my code, and every tip you might have, because if I'm honest, I'm probably going to need it. My first game will be a deck building game, but instead of each card having its own unique ability, because honestly I don't think I'll have time to make loads of unique cards, they'll have a list of actions you can and probably must take that move your character around a simple grid, trying to avoid obstacles and enemies. The goal of the game being seeing how many turns you can survive. But before I started with any of that, I needed to make some placeholder art. As you can probably notice, art isn't my strongest of skills. Honestly, I think the artistic side of things is going to be the hardest part of this project. But my first few games, I'm going to allow myself to use art I found on itch, while only using my own art for the more simple elements like the grid and card design. But as I progress through each game, I'm hoping to start using more and more of my own art. If anyone has any good tips on where to start to learn art, preferably pixel art, then please let me know. For this first week, I wanted to add all of the core mechanics the game would need, so if I didn't end up finishing it, it's still playable. The obvious one to start with was the world generation, and setting up how each part of the world will interact with each other. To do this, I created a script to add to each square in the grid that holds the game object on top of the square, which could represent the enemy or the player. Then added a check when creating the grid that the text in the middle square, when activated, it instantiates the hero prefab and assigns the middle squares holding the new hero. Once I was happy with the temp sprite and size of my hero and where it spawned, I started to create a card system. I've made deck building games many times before, so I was confident with my approach to a card system, simply using two lists, one that stores every card in your deck and another that stores every card in your hand, then creating a class holding the information of each card to put into those lists. Then creating another class called Action, storing the information each action needs. I've started with two basic actions while I'm making sure the game works, run and melee, and hopefully if I have time can create some more interesting actions in the future. Then back in the card added a list holding each action within the card and that action's corresponding power. Finally adding one last list to the manager holding each possible action within the game, which I can use to generate random actions or look for actions of a specific type later on. Because each card is very simple compared to most card games, only storing a list of actions and their power, I thought instead of making a list of cards that could appear throughout the game, each card would be randomly generated, with a random combination of actions and power levels. After spending far too long working out the transform each card in your hands needed to be so they were equidistant apart, I added a button to each card making them clickable, going through the clicked card's actions. I added a simple, but honestly hard to see green overlay around the squares you can move to when the run action is played. The higher the power of the action, the further you are allowed to move. Going back to world creation, I added in some basic enemies. At the moment, each square has a chance to spawn enemies when the world is created, and each enemy targets a random adjacent square. The plan is for the player to see which squares are being targeted so you can move around the grid avoiding attacks, and at the end of each turn, surviving enemies will attack their square. And lastly, I added UI to all the basic elements of the game, displaying the player's health, XP and energy. So far each card costs 1 energy to play and you gain 3 energy each turn, allowing you to play 3 of your 5 cards, like most deck building games. I don't have a use for XP yet, but I am planning on offering new stronger cards to the player whenever they level up. I added a health component to each enemy and made the melee action deal damage equal to its power to an adjacent enemy, allowing them to actually be killed. I also made each enemy actively move towards the player and target them at the end of each turn. That's the end of week 1. I hope you enjoyed, and I'm sorry this video ended up being far more rushed than I planned, as I wanted to spend as much time on working on the actual game. I've spent far more time than I would like to admit sorting this project out, and had to do a lot of stuff for the first time, so I hope it all turned out kind of okay. Anyway, thanks for watching and have a good day.